Friday. We're flying a little fast and loose here with a lot of kids in the house, not like the last 2 days where the kids have been outside playing. But it's time, this is time sensitive, so we have to do it now. A couple things I want to remark on the starter that I didn't say yesterday about the starter. When you're discarding, now this is my full big starter ready to bake. Normally you won't have this much, but when you're on your maintenance and you need to discard, you're going to discard about half of it. That's a good rule of thumb, about half. That was something I didn't say and I got some questions on. The other question was what temperature should the water be? I use cool or cold water. If you use warm water, it'll speed up how quickly the yeast works through the flour, so it'll grow faster. Okay, now for making bread. Again, I have my scale out, I have my big bowl, I have my starter that has been refreshed with 200 grams of flour and water yesterday. You usually need to wait about 12-ish hours is a good rule of thumb, but there's a lot of wiggle room in there that you'll learn. So if you speed up how fast it grows using heat or warm water, you may be able to use your starter as soon as 6 hours after you've fed it. If you slow it down, like if your house is really cold and it's winter, you could go longer than 12 hours. I'm going longer than 12 hours because I fed it yesterday around 3 or 4 and now it's the next morning and I think it'll still work just fine. It peaked up here, it's come down a little. It's better to catch it at the peak, but I think we'll be fine. But if you're not sure if it's fine, the way that we make our dough is going to make it clear whether or not your starter is ready. And the way you know it's ready is whether or not it floats. So I'm going to start by adding 700 grams of water right into my bowl, warm water. This is warmish. You don't want it hot. Mine's getting a little hot. I'm going to cool it down. 700 grams, about. And then, if you come over, I'll show you. I'm going to pour 200 grams of this starter into the bowl of water. And how I know the starter is ready is, does the starter float? Sure enough, it floats. It's very healthy. It's very ready. Even though I went longer than 12 hours, it's not a concern. It's floating. We're good to go. Whoop, and that should do it. Okay, so I've got it in. It floats. I'm going to mix it into the water with my hands and kind of just dissolve it all in there. Hey, Bob.
Is it floating?
Yes, it floated. It was floating.
Where?
In the water.
At the bottom?
At the top.
At the bottom.
So I've got it all dissolved. Lots of nice bubbles in there because it's a happy dough. And again, that's why you don't want the water to be super duper warm because it'll kill your yeast if it's super hot. So it's just warm. Now I've got that mixed in and I'm gonna add my flour. I'm gonna do, this is again, all-purpose unbleached. You could use bread flour, that would be fine. You can do all different kinds of flour combinations, which you'll learn later, or you can experiment with later. I would suggest just doing it this way to start. So all-purpose white flour, I'm gonna go about 800 grams, maybe 900. The total amount of flour I'm going to put in here is 1,000 grams. So I'll do, how about 850? You could do that. You could do all of this, or you could top it off with some wheat. I just think topping it off with some wheat gives it a little bit more flavor, and I just think your results are a little better in terms of the loaf in general. All white flour is considered like a San Francisco sourdough. Even though technically it's not San Francisco sourdough, because San Francisco sourdough, the reason why it's called that is because it's a starter like this that has strains of bacteria that are particular to the San Francisco area. There isn't that kind of wild yeast in the air other places, and so it has a particular tang to it. But if you look for a recipe for San Francisco sourdough, what you'll find is that it uses 100% white flour, no other kinds of flour. But generally like a country loaf or a typical sourdough rustic loaf will have some wheat in it. And I like it better with some wheat in it. So I'm gonna top this off to 1,000 This is my special flour that my in-laws gave me for a gift, and I love it. And so I kind of am sparse with, I don't want it to all be gone right away, but it's good wheat. Okay, we're up to 1,000. Now I'm gonna add my salt. People add their salt at different times. Some of the recipes call to add the salt after you've mixed this up in the next round of like shaping and stuff. I don't bother with that. I cannot tell one lick of a difference as to when you add your salt, and it's a real pain to add it later. So take it for what it's worth. I add it now. It's simpler. I can't tell any difference, and I'm practical. I'm a mom. I'm not some special baker. I also tend to add a little more salt than what most of the recipes call for. I usually do like 35 grams. I just like a little salt. I think maybe you're supposed to add closer to 20, but sometimes I'll add 35 or 40, and I think that's fine. So that's it. That's the ingredients. I will not put any more ingredients into this bread. That's all there is. And now what I do is, you could use your hands now to mix it up. I don't tend to like to do that with the big one. I tend to use either my dough hook or a spatula, like I said before. The reason why they say that it's good to use your hands is because your hands generally have some, I don't know, yeast on them or something, or they want you to get used to the feel of it all. I have done it with my hands. I just don't need that much dough on my hands. I've done it enough times. I do like the process of, you're gonna have to touch the dough plenty later, which I enjoy. Some people just hate that kind of a thing. They want to always use a tool and never use their hand. You're getting into the wrong thing if you hate getting your hands messy ever. Pick a different hobby. But I love it. So what you're gonna do, it's gonna be really shaggy. Just a really shaggy, wet dough. This is gonna be nothing like pizza dough in that it will not look smooth, it'll get smooth later at the end of the process, but it'll always be a much wetter dough. The hydration level is quite a bit higher in this dough than probably a lot of doughs you've worked with. So that's just something to get used to. But it's really fun. So once you get it fairly well mixed and the flour is pretty much incorporated and it's pretty shaggy, I tend to kind of pull from the outside in. You're going to let it rest for 20 or 30 minutes, and that's called the autolyse, I think it's called. Autolyse process, where what's happening is the water is just absorbing the flour. And that's an important step, to just let it do that without going nuts on the kneading and the really trying to work it all in right away. Let it do the work of absorbing all the flour once you do your kind of rough mix in. And then we'll come back after a while and we'll start doing something called stretch and fold, which is the way this dough is kneaded. We don't knead this dough. There are people who do that with their sourdough. Few and far between these days. I really think the stretch and fold method has sort of won out in the sourdough subculture, because I personally think it's better. But I watched a master class not too long ago of a guy doing sourdough who's clearly a master at it, and he uses a kneading method. And I watched him, and I watched the method, and I thought, no thank you. I'm not even gonna go there. So I think the stretch and fold method is really good, really works well. We'll get to it in a little bit. See ya. About 20 or 30 minutes has passed. Maybe it's been longer than that. I haven't been keeping close track because we've been doing a lot of school. But now things are absorbed. It's looking pretty good. And what I'm gonna do, I always get my hands wet before I do this, but this is called the stretch and fold. So after about 20 or 30 minutes, you're gonna do this for the first time. You're gonna do this stretching and folding, I think a total of 3 times, leaving anywhere from an hour, half an hour to an hour in between each one. You could also leave it longer than that. If you let it sit for 2 hours and then came back and did a stretch and fold, that's fine. One of the great things about sourdough is, even though it's a long process, it's a very forgiving process, because getting my hands wet again, because the starter, the sourdough yeast, works through the dough so slowly It's not like commercial yeast where it's gonna just poof it up. You have a lot of leeway in your timing, so you don't have to stress as much about like, oh no, an extra 30 minutes went by and I missed it, I was busy. It's very conducive to you not noticing it for a while, which maybe is why I like it. It takes more work on the front end of figuring that out, a lot of less work once you've sort of figured it out. You'll find it's much more adaptable. So what I'm doing is I'm getting my hands down in it, I'm grabbing onto it, to the lump, and I'm pulling it up, stretching it, and then I'm folding it. Some people say, put it in a clean bowl before you do this process. I never do. It's an extra step that you actually don't have to do. And it's kind of a pain. So I don't, because it really doesn't matter. That's the thing, it doesn't matter. Nothing bad is gonna happen because it's in this bowl. And honestly, it's not even really gonna stick all that much more than it would in a clean bowl. The point of the clean container is, I think, that somehow it would stick to the sides less. I don't think that's true. I've done it many times. It's sticky dough. Then I turn it a quarter turn and I stretch and fold it again. Sometimes I just fold it straight over. Sometimes I do like this little accordion fold in it just because it fits in the bowl better. The point is it's stretching and it's folding. I usually get my hands wet in between each stretch and fold just because it's so sticky. And that little bit of extra water isn't gonna hurt anything, but it'll just make it stick less. Now this is my third one. I've turned it a quarter turn again. I'm stretching it and I'm folding it. I'm doing a little accordion fold there, that's fine. Now this is the last one. I'm getting underneath so that I'm really getting all of it to the parts that haven't been stretched and folded. I'm stretching it and I'm folding it. It goes a lot faster than what I just did. And then usually what I do, which you don't have to do, which is a little awkward, a little wild, is I pick the whole thing up. I kind of scrape any dough that didn't really get off. And then I turn it upside down so that now the parts that I've stretched and folded are going to be on the bottom. Why do I do this? I'm not totally sure. But I like kind of getting the lump neat in there with the folds on the bottom and the stretched part on the top. And I'm not 100% sure if that is helpful. I think what it does is it makes my lump of dough neater to work with so that when I come back again, it'll be really easy for me to do the stretch and folds. And then after I do that now 2 more times, the dough will just get smooth. It'll get nice. It might develop some bubbles. Okay, here we go. This is our third and final stretch and fold. Here's the dough. You're gonna come give a little look of how it looks before I do the third one. It's looking pretty good. It's grown. So I'm just gonna do the 4 times of stretching and folding. You can see how much smoother it looked than when we started. 1, kind of pull from the bottom. 2, it's much more, you can tell that it's full of air. It feels light and like fluffy kind of. That might be a little bit of a too strong of a word. So this is 3, but I kind of messed it up a little, so the 4th is over here. Now it looks kind of messy again. I'm gonna do what I did before and flip it. And kind of get the top a little more taut. And there it is, the 4th one. So when I come back again, it will be the shaping. I will take it out of here. It'll go on the counter. I'll divide it into 2 and we'll shape it.